What is the biggest mistake you see small business owners make when running their business? Part 1. In my last two video segments, I went over some of the biggest mistakes I see entrepreneurs make when they're just getting started with a new business idea. Today, I want to focus on common mistakes I see from small business owners once the company is up and running and fully operational. I'm going to keep my scope broad enough to include prevalent non-legal mistakes as well as ones related to the law. I'm a small business owner myself, several times over, and including more than one venture that just didn't make it. So this is input born of personal experience as well as from my observations of my many amazing clients and small business networks from over the years. First, poor financial management. Poor financial management isn't just about an inability to manage cash flow, remember to pay your bills on time, or stick to your corporate budget, although it certainly does include all of that. It also includes egregious mistakes, whether or not you realize they're improper, like paying for large ticket personal items directly out of the company piggy bank and reporting them as business expenses when they have no cognizable nexus to company activities whatsoever. I've also seen companies that want to sell their company and get a fair market price for it, but they scarcely bother to create current financial records. And if they ever had records historically, they didn't bother to retain them. And unfortunately, I've had to assist more than one company that blindly entrusted their entire financial and record keeping and reporting to external accounting firms, which firms then, whether out of abject laziness or gross incompetence, proceeded to botch the tax filings so badly with errors that weren't caught and therefore compounded over the years that in some cases ultimately resulted in crippling six-figure tax bills. Plus, when your financial management is poor, it makes it that much easier for a nefarious employee to engage in corporate theft, fraud, or misappropriation of funds with a lower risk of ever getting caught. You certainly don't need an MBA or an accounting degree to own a business, but financial management is so critical to the long-term stability and viability of your company that you'll want to at least get comfortable with the basics. All right, number 2. Lack of corporate governance and record keeping. I've discussed the issue of corporate governance failures in a number of prior videos, so I'll try not to belabor the point too much here. The key takeaway is that a lack of sound corporate governance and record keeping practices isn't really a problem until you need them. And then not having them becomes a huge problem. Things like owner Bob wants to sell his company to a third-party buyer, but the scattered corporate records that do exist all indicate that Mary still owns the company. But Mary's now retired and she's moved abroad, so there's absolutely nothing to evidence that a transfer of shares from Mary to Bob ever occurred, or that Bob has the legal right to make any decisions on behalf of the company, much less sell it entirely. And so the third-party buyer looks for another potential seller without all of these issues. Or there's a dispute between two co-owners where one has a partially signed draft of an operating agreement and the other has a partially signed draft of a different operating agreement with conflicting terms. And both drafts indicate that there's a third owner with a 10% membership interest who would have a decisive role in this dispute, but for the fact that he cut ties with the company 3 years prior, although no documentation of his departure or the financial consideration, if any, offered for his interests exists either. And so now the parties are deadlocked. And on and on. These situations can cost a fortune to resolve, but they are entirely avoidable by a mere handful of hours of diligence each year dedicated to good governance practices. All right, number 3, irrational expansion. Now, the operative word here is irrational. That is, it's expansion for the sake of expansion, or expansion when the company lacks the necessary resources or operational capacity to keep up and the staff gets pushed past their breaking point, or expansion to locations where consumer demand is insufficient, straining the entire organization's finances as the floundering locations have to be propped up by the stable ones. Now, I have seen aggressive, ambitious owners make a conscious choice to do all of those things, pushing themselves and their key personnel to the limits as they charge toward expanding on a consolidated time frame and relying on the steady income from other locations to cover costs while the new locations or services ramp up toward profitability. But those are typically very experienced business owners taking a calculated risk who understood the spectacular effort that would be involved and had a rational basis for believing that there would eventually be a significant payoff. That's not irrational expansion. That's being an enterprising, industrious businessman and a confident leader. Contrast that to the common situation where the owner is the ideas guy or ideas gal, but is completely hands off on day to day operations and therefore has no concept of the effort and expense implementing these grandiose plans. They'll push their superstar executive team to pursue their new expansion idea, despite warnings that the company's budget or marketplace or staff, or all three, is insufficient to support that type of growth. Because the superstar team has always managed to find a way to bring all of the big boss's ideas and other schemes to fruition. It can be heartbreaking to see an amazing company struggle this way, especially when the owner is baffled as to why this time his team isn't pulling through for him. That's irrational expansion. Okay, so we've already covered a lot today. So this is another question that I'm going to split into two parts. Please check back soon for the second half of this segment where I'll discuss a few more significant mistakes that I see even the best business owners make while they're running a small or medium-sized business. Business owners, what so-called best practices for running a business do you find most challenging to adhere to?